The smell of lemon oil and old wood, my life's perfume, was soured by my mother's presence. Eleanor Thorne surveyed my Boston workshop. Her lips pursed in a familiar, tight line of disapproval. "Elias, honestly," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the dehumidifier. 47 years old and still playing with dusty, broken things. This is a warehouse of useless junk, not a business. Her eyes scanned past a half-restored Chippendale chair and a Georgian sideboard, landing on the small, tarnished music box on my workbench. "That thing? I told you to throw it out ages ago." I picked up the official appraisal, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. "This thing," I said, meeting her gaze, "is why you're here." Eleanor scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "An appraisal? Elias, don't be ridiculous. It's a cheap trinket you probably bought at a flea market." "I'm 47, Mother, not a child playing with toys." My voice was low, the steel in it forged over decades of her disapproval. "This is Thorne & Sons Restoration, a business I built from nothing. With a family name, you begged me to change because you were embarrassed by it." She flinched, a barely perceptible tightening around her eyes. "All my life, you've seen this work as a failure, a dusty monument to potential you believe I wasted. You saw decay where I saw history. You saw rust where I saw a story waiting to be told." I tapped the appraisal, the crisp paper a stark contrast to the tarnished silver of the music box beside it. "Well, this story is about our family, the one you claim to care so much about." I pushed the document across the workbench until it stopped just short of her manicured fingers. "Read it. Read what your useless junk is actually worth." Her hand, adorned with a diamond ring that screamed new money, hovered over the appraisal. She wouldn't touch it, as if the paper itself were contaminated by the same dust she so despised. Her refusal was a ghost of a memory, and my mind snapped back 25 years. I was 22, and my father was still alive. We were at a sprawling, run-down farm estate auction out in the Berkshires. Dad's eyes, the same ones I now see in the mirror, lit up with a treasure hunter's glee. He saw the beauty in forgotten things, the craftsmanship beneath the grime. He was the original, Thorne & Son. Mother, dragged along under protest, had stayed in the car complaining about the smell of hay and the lack of, quote, civilization. Quote, "Dad and I found the music box in a crate of old pewter and rusted tools. It was black with tarnish, its melody silent. 'Look at the inlay, Eli,' he'd whispered, tracing the faint floral pattern. 'Someone loved this once.' We bought the whole crate for $50. When I showed it to Mother later, her reaction was immediate and surgical. 'Get that filthy thing out of my house,' she'd said, not even looking up from her magazine. 'Your father encourages this hoarding. It's common.' That was her favorite word for anything she didn't like. Common. 2 months later, Dad's heart gave out while he was working on an old secretary desk. After the funeral, the first thing Mother did was hire a company to clear out his workshop. She sold his tools for scrap. She called my passion a childish hobby and told me to enroll in business school to get a clean job with a respectable title. She wanted to erase every trace of the man who saw value where she saw only dirt. Her own childhood was one of scraping by, a fact she buried under layers of expensive clothes and a carefully curated social circle. To her, my workshop wasn't just a business she disapproved of. It was a terrifying step backward. It was a monument to the poverty she'd escaped, a public display of the common life she feared. My success didn't matter. The perception did. So I rented my own space. I put Thorne & Sons Restoration on the door, using the name she'd tried to bury with my father. I kept the music box, not just as a memento, but as a silent act of defiance. It was a reminder of the man who taught me to look closer. And now, here it was, the anchor of my entire life's conflict, sitting between us on the workbench. The past and the present colliding. Her hand still trembled above the appraisal, her polished facade finally beginning to crack. For the first time, she wasn't looking at me with disdain. She was looking at me with something that resembled fear. Finally, with a tremor she couldn't conceal, her fingers closed around the edge of the appraisal. Her eyes, which had always scanned my work with such casual disdain, now darted across the page with frantic speed. I watched her read the first line, then the second. I saw the exact moment the words registered, because the carefully constructed mask of superiority didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The blood drained from her face, leaving her lipstick a garish slash of color against pale, papery skin. $4.2 million, I said, my voice unnervingly calm. That's the estimated auction value, from the house of Fabergé, not a cheap trinket, mother. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning horror. Fabergé? That's impossible, it's filthy. It was tarnished. I corrected her. There's a difference you never cared to learn. I reached past her and picked up the music box. My touch, gentle, reverent. With a soft cloth from my workbench, I wiped a small section on the bottom. The tarnish gave way to reveal an intricate maker's mark and a set of tiny engraved initials, E.K. Her breath hitched, a sharp, wounded sound. The appraiser was a specialist, I continued, my voice a low, steady current. He recognized the work of Henrik Wigstrom, one of Fabergé, Zeston, master workmasters, but it was the initials that told the real story. E.K. Elena Kovalenko, your mother's name. No, she whispered, shaking her head. The denial was a reflex, weak and useless. Oh, yes, I said, pressing on. He said it was a one-of-a-kind commission from before the Revolution, a gift to a young lady in St. Petersburg, a young lady whose family lost everything and fled to America with only a few personal treasures. Sound familiar? I set the box down and looked her dead in the eye. All my life, you've told me stories about your family, the counts and the barons you were supposedly descended from, the high society you were born to inhabit. But you never mentioned the truth, did you? You never mentioned the struggle, the poverty, the life you deemed too common to ever speak of. Her manicured hands were now gripping the edge of the workbench, her knuckles white. My father and I bought this at a farm auction. It was in a crate of junk because your mother, my grandmother, probably had to sell it for pennies just to put food on the table. It found its way back to us by sheer, dumb luck, a ghost from the life you worked so hard to bury. Quote, I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a near whisper. When you told me to throw this out, you weren't just insulting my work. You weren't just disrespecting Dad's memory. You were throwing away your own mother. You looked at the last beautiful piece of her story, a piece worth a fortune, and all you could see was the dirt. All you could see was the common past you were so ashamed of. Her composure was gone, replaced by a raw, gaping shame. The diamond on her finger seemed to mock her, a symbol of the new life she'd built on a foundation of forgotten history. You called my life's work useless junk, I said, the final words landing like hammer blows. But the only useless thing here, Mother, is the lie you've been living. The silence that followed was heavier than any object in my workshop. I had spent years rehearsing this confrontation in my head, imagining a firestorm of denial, of rage. I was braced for another attack on my character, on my father's memory. But the storm never came. Eleanor didn't move. Her shoulders, always held so rigidly, seemed to collapse inward, as if the strings holding her upright had been cut. The formidable matriarch I had battled my entire life vanished, replaced by a frail older woman staring at a ghost on my workbench. Her hand, the one with the gaudy ring, slowly lifted. It wasn't reaching for the appraisal anymore. Her fingers, stripped of their usual arrogance, hovered over the Fabergé box. With a hesitation I had never seen in her, she gently touched the tarnished silver, her fingertip tracing the floral inlay my father had pointed out all those years ago. "I remember the lullaby," she whispered. Her voice was a fragile, papery thing, a sound I didn't recognize. "My mother, she would wind it for me when there was no food, so I wouldn't hear my own stomach." Her gaze lifted from the box and swept across my workshop. For the first time, she wasn't scanning for flaws. Her eyes lingered on the half-finished leg of a Queen Anne chair, the intricate grain of a rosewood veneer. She wasn't seeing junk anymore. She was seeing the work, the time, the history, the very thing she had spent a lifetime deriding. She was seeing my father. She was seeing Tar 4M Sma. All the righteous anger, the carefully sharpened points I had spent decades honing, suddenly felt blunt and useless. The fire in my gut cooled to a pile of cold ash. I had won. I had shattered her facade and forced her to face the truth she'd buried. But there was no triumph in it. There was only the quiet, hollow echo of a victory that felt more like a loss. She looked back at me, her eyes clear of judgment for the first time in my memory. They were just empty. "You're so much like him," she said, the words barely audible. "He saw the beauty in broken things. I only ever saw the breaks." Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of my workshop, leaving the $4 million appraisal on the bench. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with the priceless heirloom and the crushing weight of my success. For a long time, I just stood there. The silence in the workshop was absolute. A perfect vacuum where my mother's presence had been. The air settled, the familiar scent of wood dust and solvent reclaiming its territory. My victory was a ghost in the room, shimmering and formless. I had landed the final killing blow in a war that had defined my life, and all I felt was the profound emptiness of a battlefield after the guns fall silent. Her final words echoed, "I only ever saw the breaks." It wasn't an apology, not really. It was a confession. A stark, brutal admission that stripped away decades of her carefully constructed narrative. She hadn't been fighting me. She had been fighting the ghosts of her own past, and I was just the unfortunate reflection. My workshop, my passion, my father's legacy. It was all a mirror, showing her the poverty-stricken girl she thought she'd buried under diamonds and disdain. I ran a hand over my face, the grit of sawdust on my palm a familiar comfort. The anger that had been my fuel for so long was gone. Selling the box and flaunting the money now felt cheap. It felt like her kind of victory, a transaction that reduced everything to a number on a page. It would be an ending to the story, yes, but it would be the wrong one. My father didn't teach me to see the price tag. He taught me to see the provenance, the craftsmanship, the soul of a piece. To sell it would be to betray him all over again, to prove my mother right in the most ironic way possible, that in the end everything is for sale. No, this wasn't about money. It was about legacy. My gaze fell upon the Fabergé box. It was still a masterpiece, shrouded in the grime of a hard life. My mother saw the dirt. My father saw the inlay. The appraiser saw the maker's mark. I saw all of it. I saw the whole story, from a St. Petersburg palace to a Berkshire's farm auction to this workbench in Boston. And I knew, with a clarity that felt like cold water, what I had to do. Revenge, like restoration, is a patient art. It's not about demolition. It's about stripping away the ugly varnish of lies to reveal the truth of the wood grain beneath. I walked over to my office, a small glass-walled cube at the back of the workshop. I bypassed the auction house's number and looked up a different one. My fingers felt steady as I dialed. A crisp, professional voice answered, "Museum of Fine Arts, Curatorial Department." "My name is Elias Thorne," I said, my voice even. "I'm the owner of Thorne & Sons Restoration. I'm calling about a potential acquisition, or rather, a long-term loan. I believe I have something that belongs in your European decorative arts collection." There was a polite, slightly weary pause on the other end. I could picture the curator, fielding calls all day from people who thought their grandmother's porcelain dog was a lost Ming treasure. "Mr. Thorne, we have a very rigorous process for acquisitions." It's a Fabergé, I cut in, letting the name hang in the air. A music box. Previously unknown, uncatalogued. Workmaster Henrik Wigstrom. The silence on the other end was different now. It was the sound of a professional paying attention. And the provenance? The curator asked, her voice sharpened with cautious excitement. Impeccable, I replied. It was a commission for a young woman named Elena Kovalenko. Just before the Russian Revolution, she fled to the United States after her family lost everything. She was my grandmother. I heard the soft scratching of a pen, the tap of a keyboard. Elena Kovalenko Thorne. Good heavens. Your mother is Eleanor Thorne? The name was a shock. Of course they knew her. Eleanor Thorne, the prominent philanthropist, the patron of the arts, the woman who sat on charity boards and whose picture appeared in society pages. The woman who built a fortress of wealth and influence to hide the fact that her mother once had to sell a masterpiece to survive. Yes, I said, she is. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. The curator could connect the dots. The story was already writing itself in her mind. A lost heirloom of a prominent Boston family, discovered by the restorer's son his mother had so publicly dismissed. It was perfect. Mr. Thorne, the curator said, her voice now brimming with energy. This is extraordinary. Would you be willing to bring it in? We would need to verify it, of course, but if it's what you say it is. I have the full appraisal from a certified specialist, I said, my eyes landing on the paper my mother had left behind, but I have one condition for the loan. Name it. The restoration, I said. It's tarnished, and the movement is seized, but it's all there. I want to be the one to restore it. And the museum plaque. It must tell the full story. It will be credited as on loan from the collection of Thorne & Sons Restoration in memory of Robert Thorne. My father's name, not hers. There was no hesitation. That seems more than appropriate. When can you come in? We set a time for the following week. I hung up the phone and walked back to the workbench. I picked up the music box, its weight feeling different in my hands. It was no longer a weapon against my mother. It was a monument to my father. It was the flagship piece of my life's work. My mother would not be able to escape it. She would attend galas and fundraisers at that museum. She would walk through the halls she considered her social playground, and there, under soft gallery lighting, restored to its former glory, would be her mother's music box. It would be displayed for the entire world to see, a shining testament to the useless junk she despised and the common past she tried to erase. She wouldn't be able to ignore it. She wouldn't be able to spin it. She would have to walk past the truth every time she put on a ball gown. The plaque would name my father, immortalizing the man she tried to bury, and credit the business she called an embarrassment. It wasn't a loud, fiery revenge. It was a quiet, permanent, and beautifully crafted one, and it would play its song for years to come. The week that followed was a quiet pilgrimage into the heart of the music box. My workshop became a sanctuary, the outside world fading to a muffled hum. Revenge, I discovered, was a meticulous process. It began with a dentist's pick and a solution of precipitated chalk, patiently lifting away the dark tarnish of decades. It wasn't cleaning, it was an excavation. With each millimeter of grime I removed, a delicate, engraved rose came into the light, its silver petals still perfect. I remembered my father's words at that auction. Someone loved this once. He was right. Love, I learned, could be etched into metal. My phone rang on the third day. The caller ID simply said, "Mother, Wara." I let it ring 4 times before answering, my hands steady as I continued polishing a corner of the box. "They told me at the museum," she said. There was no preamble. Her voice was thin, brittle. The commanding tone she'd used her whole life was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite place. Not defeat. Not yet. It was the sound of a strategist realizing her opponent had moved a queen into a position she never anticipated. "I assumed they would," I replied, my voice calm. I dipped a cotton swab in solvent and gently worked on the seized winding key. This is a private family matter, Elias. A public display is undignified. What's undignified, Mother? That grandmother Elena had to sell it? Or that you were too ashamed to ever tell me the truth about where we came from? I could hear her sharp intake of breath. This isn't about dignity. It's about history, and the plaque will honor the man who taught me to see it. A long silence stretched down the line, filled only by the whisper of my cloth against the silver. Then, the inevitable. "I'll buy it from you," she said, her voice dropping into the familiar cadence of a business negotiation. "Name a price. 4 million, 5, whatever the auction estimate was. It'll be a private sale. No one needs to know. We'll keep it in the family." Keep it hidden, she meant. Bury it again. I stopped my work and leaned back in my chair, looking at the half-restored masterpiece gleaming under my work light. I saw the cheap trinket she saw, and the priceless heirloom the world would see. The two realities could no longer coexist. "It's not for sale," I said, and the words felt like liberation. "It was never about the money. I know that's a difficult concept for you to grasp, but some things have a value you can't write on a check." I hung up before she could reply. There was nothing more to say. 2 days later, I finally freed the mechanism. The delicate gears, cleaned and oiled, were a marvel of miniature engineering. Holding my breath, I turned the small, polished key. There was a soft click, a whir of clockwork, and then a melody. It was a simple, haunting Russian lullaby, the notes clear and bright after a lifetime of silence. The lullaby she'd mentioned. The song played to quiet a hungry child. In the sterile quiet of my workshop, it felt like my grandmother's ghost was in the room, finally singing her story out loud. When I walked into the Museum of Fine Arts, the restored Fabergé box rested on a velvet cushion inside a climate-controlled case. It shone under the track lighting, its silver and rose-gold inlay intricate and dazzling. The melody was silent now, but its memory hung in the air. The curator, a woman named Dr. Alistair, couldn't take her eyes off it. "It's magnificent, Mr. Thorne," she breathed. "Your restoration work is as much a piece of art as the object itself. You've brought it back to life." "I just gave it its voice back," I said. She glanced at me, a flicker of professional sympathy in her eyes. "Your mother called, you know, Eleanor. She's a major patron. She strongly suggested we reconsider the terms of the loan, particularly the text on the plaque." "And?" A small, firm smile touched Dr. Alistair's lips. "I informed her that the museum's curatorial integrity is not for sale. The story is the soul of the piece. The plaque will be printed exactly as you requested." She gestured to an empty, velvet-lined alcove in the main European gallery, a prime location right between a set of Romanov jewels and a collection of Rococo snuff boxes. "It will be installed there for the Winter Gala next month. Your mother is the chair of the event." The perfect, natural justice of it was breathtaking. She would have no choice. She would have to stand before Boston's elite, in a room filled with the history she revered, and be confronted by the one piece of history she'd tried to destroy. Her own story, told by the son she'd disowned, in memory of the husband she'd tried to erase. My revenge wasn't loud. It was a quiet, perfectly. The Winter Gala was an ocean of black ties and shimmering gowns, a world my mother commanded with effortless grace. I, in my simple, well-tailored suit, was an island of sober reality. I didn't seek her out. I didn't have to. I just made my way to the European Gallery, where a small crowd had already gathered around the new acquisition. There it was, sitting in its velvet-lined alcove, bathed in a soft, reverent light. It gleamed, a tiny, perfect star of silver and gold. But it was the brass plaque beneath it that held the real power. It read, "Fabergé Music Box, circa 1916, asterisk. Workmaster Henrik Wigstrom, on long-term loan from the collection of Thorne and Sons Restoration." restored by Elias Thorne, in memory of Robert Thorne, who saw the beauty in broken things. I heard her approach before I saw her, the subtle shift in the crowd, the faint scent of her expensive perfume cutting through the champagne-scented air. She stood beside me, her back ramrod straight, her face a pale, frozen mask. Her eyes were fixed on my father's name. "You did this to humiliate me," she whispered, her voice a sliver of ice. I didn't look at her. I kept my gaze on the box. "No," I said, my voice low and clear, for her ears only. "I did this to honor him. And to honor her." I finally turned to face her. The diamonds at her throat seemed to glitter with cold fire, but her eyes were hollow. "This isn't about humiliation, Mother. It's about truth. You can't buy it, you can't bury it, and you can't hide from it. Not anymore." A prominent donor, a man with a booming voice, clapped her on the shoulder. "Eleanor, marvelous addition. A piece of your family's history, I hear? What a story. You must be so proud of your son." She couldn't speak. She just stood there, trapped between the man's beaming praise and my quiet gaze. A faint, terrible smile stretched her lips, a rictus of social grace. "Immensely." She managed to choke out. I watched her walk away, swallowed by the glittering crowd she had cultivated. The victory wasn't in her pain. It was in the silence of a lie that could no longer be spoken, the silence of a story that would now, finally, be told correctly. The music box sat in its case, a permanent, beautiful, and quiet testament. My revenge was complete. It wasn't a blaze of glory. It was a perfectly restored piece of history, placed exactly where it belonged, after she spent years calling my collection useless junk. Do you think my mother has any moral right to the fortune from this heirloom? I'm genuinely curious to hear what you think is fair in the comments.